What's up everybody, Stankie here, and today we're taking a look at all the new enhancement changes coming in midnight. And there's a lot of changes, so let's just get right into it. Starting off with our enhancement talent tree, which has undergone some major reconstructive surgery, if you will. A lot of new talents and or reworked old talents, and some that have been sent to the maw. Elemental Blast, for example, has been retired, as well as Primordial Wave, Ice Strike, Hailstorm, and Swirling Maelstrom, Legacy of the Frost Witch, and Molten Thunder. Now the only thing I'm really sad to see go is Elemental Blast, but seeing as a lot of things are getting pruned across all classes and specs, I'm not really surprised that Elemental Blast got the axe, and design-wise, for the new Midnight enhancement, it fits in a lot less, and there's fewer ways to capitalize on Elemental Blast in Midnight overall. It would kinda just be a harder hitting single target spender that buffs you, not something you'd actively play around like we've done in the past by, for example, stacking Feral Spirits in one way, shape, or form. So looking at it like that, it makes sense that they'd rather we just press Chain Lightning on AoE, Lightning Bolt on single target, and that's that. Ice Strike and Frost Shock talents also make sense that they got the axe. They were occasionally good, but more often than not clunky to play with, as we needed our globals for other things. And properly capitalizing on Ice Strike, Frost Shock always required 2 globals, and we are starved for globals. So we lose the Frosty class fantasy, but Primordial Wave being gone we'll talk a bit about later, and Legacy of the Frost Witch being removed is covered by a new talent, which is Elemental Tempo. It increases our elemental damage by 10%, and each stack of Maelstrom spent reduces Storm Strike and Lava Lash cooldown by 0.3 seconds, so up to 3 seconds per spender you cast. So rather than resetting Storm Strike anytime you spend 10 Maelstrom, you now reduce cooldown on both Storm Strike and Lava Lash anytime you spend any amount of Maelstrom. So it lets you keep the momentum you're used to for Stormbringer builds, and there's Storm Strike spam, but it also now works for Totemic Lava Lash builds, and is actually a core element in Totemic's rotation now, because they've reduced Lava Lash cooldown reduction from Hot Hand down to 50% from 75%, but it does last 2 seconds longer, and Ashen Catalyst no longer reduces Lava Lash cooldown anytime Flame Shock ticks. It now instead reduces Lava Lash cooldown when you hit a Flame Shock target with Lava Lash by 2 seconds. So especially on AoE, you won't passively get Lava Lash back. You now gotta work for it by casting spenders. But wait, there's more. To make that loop even more interesting, Totemic gets a new hero talent, Totemic Momentum. Maelstrom spent increases Hot Hand duration. So not only does spending reduce Lava Lash cooldown, it also increases Hot Hand duration, which makes for a very fun gameplay loop, and it makes spending pivotal for Totemic rather than just something you do to keep up Legacy of the Frost Witch buff. Now I will have a hero talent video out as well if you want to hear more about the new Totemic hero talents and how they work with our new tree. However, there's more new talents. Straight out of PvP we have Ride the Lightning. Now, if you've ever done PvP or enabled War Mode, you might have tried this talent out. Storm Strike and Lava Lash cast Chain Lightning, dealing 20% reduced damage with each jump. Now, these Chain Lightnings do not spend Maelstrom, so they're just naked baby Chain Lightnings, like if you were to hard cast one. However, they work with things that procs off Chain Lightning. For example, Stormbringer's Lightning Rods. Anytime you Storm Strike or Lava Lash, you will apply a Lightning Rod. If the target already has one, it gets applied to another target. So more often than not, you have like 5 rods out constantly for some massive AoE damage, and 0 need to tab target or think about it, you just smash. Then there's Overcharge. Nature crit damage is increased by 40% of your critical strike chance. Passive damage, yeah! Now I don't know if this is enough to scale up crit for us overall, but I also have no idea where we will end up stat-wise when all is said and done. A lot of things are getting reworked. Then we have Lightning Strikes. Consuming 10 stacks of Maelstrom increases your next Storm Strike or Lava Lash damage by 25%, and they generate 1 Maelstrom. So it's kind of a reworked Legacy of the Frost Witch, and it fits in very well with our new playstyle, which is very much focused on generators, spenders, synergy, constantly driving you to spend more. So, kinda like real life? Or Diablo 4?
Got him!
Then we have some new-ish talents that were removed from some of our old talents. Thunder Capacitor, Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning deals 20% more damage and has a 20% chance to refund all Maelstrom spent. The Maelstrom refund comes from our old Static Accumulation, which now instead only generates Maelstrom during Ascendance, but also during Doom Winds. And the Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning damage was removed from old Thorim's Invocation. But Thorim's Invocation now works during both Ascendance and Doom Winds, and it works off of Crash Lightning as well, meaning that during Ascendance or Doom Winds, your Storm Strike and Crash Lightning will spend up to 10 Maelstrom on either Chain Lightning or Lightning Bolt. So not only has this been increased to 10 Maelstrom spent instead of 5, but fitting in Crash Lightning during Ascendance, for example, no longer feels bad. And more importantly, due to the fact that this works off of Doom Winds, you can just not spec into Ascendance and you have a 1-minute cooldown instead, since Doomwind works like Ascendance if you're spec'd into Thorim's Invocation. You just don't get Wind Strike. So having the option to play around a 1-minute Ascendance window is something I'm looking forward to play around with for different encounters, potentially for some keys. Being able to line it with different mechanics, etc. So yeah, just being able to is awesome. I love it. Then we have some straight up reworked or tweaked talents. Feral Spirits is now a passive that only procs from Doom Winds and Sundering. Nature Wolf for Doom Winds, Fire for Sundering, and they increase nature or fire damage by 5% and physical damage by 5%, and they last for 8 seconds. I am personally not a huge fan of this. I get why they're doing it. Fewer cooldowns, fewer buttons, and they have not liked the degen Feral Spirit stacking and cooldown reduction playstyle and the hell that is tuning it, because we keep finding ways to abuse it. But this is just a bit too much. It is, first of all, extremely boring. It is unethically bad, as well as a capstone talent. Now, if they want to keep it like this, I do wish they'd move Feral Spirits in the tree. I personally don't want Feral Spirits to be a big choice. I feel like it's a very iconic enhancement skill that they've not only completely gutted over the course of War Within and then killed in Midnight, they've now made it into a passive buff baked into Doom Winds and Sundering that you then have to weigh against stuff like Ascendance or Thunder Capacitor, etc. Now, I don't fully mind that it's tied to Doom Winds and Sundering. I think it's a smart change. We always comboed Feral Spirits with cooldowns, so now a button is gone. I just don't want builds running without Feral Spirits, because other talents are just way more valuable or build defining, if you will. I just want my dogs, man. I just want my dogs. Then we have Ascendance, Deeply Rooted Elements, and Doom Winds. Ascendance and Deeply Rooted Elements still works as it does in retail. However, if you talent into either of them, it replaces Doom Winds, and you now gain Doom Winds when you press or proc Ascendance. So again, fewer buttons. However, when Ascendance isn't active, you have a chance to proc Doom Winds per Maelstrom spent. And with Thorim's Invocation, it turns into a mini Ascendance. So it's like getting Deeply Rooted Elements without needing to play Deeply Rooted Elements. You get to chase that dopamine rush, hoping for a proc anytime you spend, but you also get the consistency of actually having Ascendance as a cooldown. And even if Doom Winds is slightly less strong than Ascendance, the playstyle remains. Storm Strike spends Maelstrom for you, as well as Crash Lightning. Now, it does mean that Deeply Rooted Element actually lags behind a lot, at least as far as fun goes. If you play Deeply Rooted Elements instead of Ascendance, your Doom Winds proc is tied to Deeply Rooted Ascendance proc. So now you're only chasing an RNG proc without any consistency. So it just feels worse. And in my opinion, to be honest, at this point, just give us a different talent here. Just send Deeply Rooted Elements to the maw. Because if you spec into Ascendance, you automatically get Deeply Rooted Elements, just that it's a Doom Winds proc that works like Ascendance. But then, like I said, you have the consistent 2-minute cooldown, whereas specking into Deeply Rooted Elements, you lose the consistency consistency or a stronger proc, since you get both Ascendance and Doom wins. So gameplay-wise, Deeply Rooted Elements is just worse and slightly redundant at this point. Give us something else! Then we have Surging Elements and Primordial Storm. With the removal of Primordial Wave, we instead get Surging Elements that procs off of Sundering, so combining those for fewer buttons. So no more Flame Shock spread into Primordial Wave. You just slap down Sundering, increase your haste by 15%, not increased by targets hit, and you generate 5 Maelstrom. Run into Pact, smack Sundering, off you go. Now I am not going to miss having to spread Flame Shock for it, having ad spawn, throwing a Flame Shock, then a Lava Lash, and just as you're about to hit Primordial Wave, the f***ing Frost DK comes in like someone pissed in their salad, and boom, all the ads are gone. And you just wasted 2 globals and whatever time you spend holding Primordial Wave to make it line up with the ads. But yeah, now we can just insta-smack Sundering and get back to blasting. Sundering is also the new trigger for Primordial Storm. So Primordial Storm works the same as before, but yeah, now tied to Sundering instead. All in all, awesome changes. Moving on. Voltaic Blaze now replaces Flame Shock. It's on a 10-second cooldown rather than a proc. It applies Flame Shock to 6 targets and can be further improved by the reworked Fire Nova talent, which increases Maelstrom generation from Voltaic Blaze by 2, so 3 in total, and it has a 30% chance to cause a Fire Nova. So we get Fire Nova in Spirit. I do really like this change. It keeps Flame Shock relevant rather than an annoyance or last resort filler. You now have a mini nuke on a 10-sec cooldown that generates a ton of Maelstrom. So it feels really good to press, and it drives your rotation forward rather than, like I said, a last resort filler. And we have minor stuff like Elemental Assault being 1 point down from 2, Crashing Storm is now Chaining Storms and does not increase Crash Lightning damage. And they also changed Maelstrom Weapon. It now only applies to damaging spenders, so Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, but you can no longer spend 10 Maelstrom to instantly Healing Surge yourself. And Raging Maelstrom no longer increases spender damage, but it instead reduces cast time on Healing Surge and Chain Heal based on Maelstrom spent and increases their healing done. So it's like sending a 10 Maelstrom instant Healing Surge without actually spending Maelstrom on the heal. So you can send a 10 stack Chain Lightning, then instantly Healing Surge yourself the next global. This is something I've asked for ever since like Dragonflight. Previously, if we needed to heal ourselves, we had to spend both a global doing so and whatever Maelstrom we currently had to make it stronger and potentially instant. This for Enhancement resulted in not only a substantial DPS loss, it also killed most of the momentum you have in your rotation, because so much of it is tied to spending on Chain Lightning or Lightning Bolt. With this change, we can actually heal ourselves without it being tied to too much of a loss. Now, depending on how strong our Healing Surges ends up to be, this seems low-key OP. 1 spender, 1 giant heal, 1 spender, 1 giant heal. I'ma take all that rot damage to the face and just heal. But also great for off healing and keys. As well, you don't feel punished to save your teammate anymore. Previously, I just watched them die and go like, I mean, that's a you problem. This is my damage. Get fucked. Then we have the new Apex talents coming in Midnight, which are all currently called Storm Unleashed. All 3 of them. These new talents empower Crash Lightning in various ways. In Midnight, Crash Lightning no longer gets buffed by Chain Lightning, and Chain Lightning doesn't reduce its cooldown either, so that interaction is fully gone. However, with the first Apex talent, Storm Unleashed 1, each Maelstrom spend has a 2% chance to give you a Crash Lightning charge that ignores cooldown, and multiple crash buffs can overlap, so up to 20% on a maxed out spender. Storm Unleashed 2, however, spenders deal 15% more damage and weapon imbuement, so Wind Fury and Flame Tongue deals 20% more damage. More passive strongs. Then we have Storm Unleashed 3. Crash Lightning electrocutes the ground, dealing 50% of its damage over 2 seconds, and it increases auto attack speed by 15% and remember, multiple crash buffs can now overlap but not extend. Now I've seen this go to like 6, but it can for sure go higher, and you can somewhat stack it up if you want. Each buff giving 15% attack speed and causes your Lava Lash and Storm Strike to deal increased splash damage per stack, but it also synergizes with our weapon imbuements. It can make Wind Fury go crazy for some massive single target damage, and overall Maelstrom generation, and Flame Tongue for Totemic can proc a Whirl of Flame for some massive AoE damage, which in turn does, yeah, I mean, it's just crazy. But most importantly, they're so much fun to play with, especially since they added in Crash Lightning to Thorim's Invocation. So Crash Lightning casts Spenders during Ascendance and Doom Winds. Previously, you really wanted to crash during Doom Winds, but since you often pop Ascendance with Doom Winds, you always pry out spamming Wind Strike. So I always felt like I missed out on maxing Doom Winds to min-max Ascendance, and now I can do both and it just flows better. And not to mention the electrocuted ground from Crash Lightning with the updated Crash Lightning animation, it just looks amazing. But other than that, there has also been some heavy losses in our Shaman tree as far as defensives and utility goes, which sucks a ton, not gonna lie, but it's also not finished, so hopefully at least the defensive department gets addressed. As if. So, for example, no Stone Bulwark Totems, so no on-demand Absorb, which was very strong for surviving big hits. Instead, Earth Elemental has gotten a cooldown reduction, so we can get the 15% max health and 5% damage taken reduction buff more often. Well, every 3 minutes, like old Stone Bulwark. Now, while I don't mind seeing Bob the Boulder more often, it does have a lot of issues, and it's nowhere near enough to offset losing Stone Bulwark. Biggest one being an M+ in higher keys, and I'm not talking about M+ title keys, you know, just weekly 10s or higher. Your Earth Elemental will die instantly and you lose the buff. Maybe you want to pop it to survive unavoidable damage on a big pull? Well, this won't help you with that. You will spawn Bob will taunt and then die. So yeah, it's Astral Shift or nothing, cause Bob will die. One thing they could do is tie the buff to casting Earth Ellie, not Earth Ellie itself, so even if it dies, you still get the buff. I don't know if that messes with PvP, but I'm certain you can work around it, and frankly, I don't care. I don't care about PvP. I care about PvPers, but I don't care about PvP. Secondly, we already had Earth Ellie, so removing Bulwark and reducing Earth Ellie cooldown does not give us the same defensive layer. We lose one and we get a worse one more often. Now on top of this, Thunderstorm is gone. No knockback, no knock up, which is a big loss as far as utility goes. This shit went hard in M+. No more. Sundering no longer in-caps. Now Sundering not in-capping isn't something I necessarily mind. You played with that a lot as Totemic, and even though I loved Sundering in-cap, it does diminish it from being a DPS ability. I remember in Dragonflight just holding Sundering to in-cap certain mob casts, which feels bad for a damaging ability. We can also no longer reset our totem cooldown, so no more double stun or double wind rush, etc., which is also a massive loss as far as utility goes and will be missed. All of this being said, Shaman Tree still has unfinished abilities in it, and it is early alpha, so hopefully something gets added that makes up for our defensive losses. I'm tired of dying. I played BM Hunter in a few keys and it was absolute heaven in comparison, just having 2 charges on Survival of the Fittest compared to having 1 charge on Astral Shift. Please help me. Now overall, from mostly dummy testing and follower dungeons because no one has alpha, I am very optimistic with where they are going. There's a ton of great changes, most of which I am very happy with. The way they've pruned our button bloat is overall great. They've just combined a lot of stuff. So now we just smash. We don't need to spend 3 globals to set shit up before we can smash. We just smash, and that's good. Now, if I have to complain a bit, I do feel like Stormbringer is a bit bare bone, but that could also just be me going from retail enhanced to this. Retail Stormbringer is currently far too complex with far too many conditions and with far too many different procs to track. I mean, I track like 9 things right now. Midnight Stormbringer, however, has basically none of that, but it flows extremely well and is just so much fun to play, and I can't wait to test it in M+. Totemic, on the other hand, got a lot more nuance than before, with the rework to how Lava Lash cooldown reduction works, and that you can extend Hot Hand as Totemic. Totemic, no joke, feels great right now. Really enjoying the cooldown reduction loop. And if you want to know more about the new hero talents and how they work, check out my other hero talent video. And yeah, that's about it. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on this new take on Enhancement coming in midnight. Thank you all so much for watching. If you have any questions, hit me up in the comments. If you want to help support my work, do check out my Patreon or YouTube membership. Thank you all for watching. I will see you next time.